My name is Liz Trantowski. I'm the class of 96. I am honored to be the president-elect of the Alumni Association Board of Directors. This year marks the 45th anniversary of the establishment of the James E. Armstrong Award. Inaugurated in 1978, the Armstrong Award is conferred on alumni who are current or former employees of Notre Dame and have rendered distinguished service to the university. It is nearly the oldest award presented by the Alumni Association, second only to the Soren Award. I am very pleased to introduce today's honoree, Carol Mullaney. When I asked some of Carol's colleagues to describe her, they told me she is the ultimate team player. Nearly 13 years ago, Carol joined the staff of Notre Dame in the Office of Continuous Improvement. There, her objective was to make Notre Dame better every day. Carol was so successful in this position that Notre Dame added a second role to her portfolio, Director of Sustainability. Her expertise paved the way for the university to achieve significant progress in its comprehensive sustainability strategy. Among the initiatives she shepherded included a multifaceted strategy to reduce food waste on campus. This included efforts to donate excess consumable food to local outlets, as well as implementing a recycling system that converts non-consumable food waste into clean energy for a local farm. When the global pandemic forced campus to close, Carol was tapped to direct Notre Dame's COVID-19 response unit. Her management skills and can-do attitude were a valuable asset as the university navigated the rapidly changing landscape of COVID-19 prevention, testing, and vaccines. Another one of her colleagues told me, "I worked with Carol in several roles in the COVID response unit. She was an inspirational leader and a great friend during a very difficult environment. Whether it was chasing after students, running through the testing area, or taking tough calls from their parents, she handled every situation with poise and grace." From 2001 to 2004, Carol's also served on the Notre Dame Alumni Association Board of Directors. And it was there during her term that she met her future husband, Brian McMorrow. On behalf of the Notre Dame Alumni Association, it is my honor to welcome and present to you this year's James E. Armstrong Award winner, Carol Mullaney.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you all so much. I'm so honored to be recognized by an organization and people that I have such high esteem for. So as Liz pointed out, there are two prominent parts of my life that overlap today, and so I'd like to share a few stories with you about both of those. I gulp when I say this, but 20 years ago, those of you who are on the alumni board, I was in your spot. And some of my friends are here. And what I loved about board meetings were these awards dinners. So that puts a little pressure on me, I have to say, in doing this. But hopefully I can share a few of those stories. So as I thought about what I might share over these past few weeks, a couple of themes popped into my head. One was the power of an invitation, which you'll see in some of my stories. And then last week, I had the good fortune of being with a small group of special guests here on campus who heard a motivational speech from Coach Freeman in the locker room. I was ready to suit up, I have to tell you. Two of the messages that he shared with us, that he shares with his players are, choose hard, meaning don't choose the easy path, and choose Notre Dame over and over and over again. So that ties in with my response to invitations. So my earliest invitation to embrace Notre Dame came from my father, Phil. He is with us today, I'm thrilled to say. A graduate of Loyola University of Chicago, he grew up in Chicago as an Irish Catholic kid and an avid sports fan. So of course, he was introduced to Notre Dame. He told me the other day he came to his first football game with his father when he was 8 years old. So it's 82 years ago. he had such commitment that not only did he attend all home football games and a lot of away games throughout his life, but for probably a 50-year period, he would drive 70 miles for men's basketball games from 1968, when the Joyce Center opened, until just a few years ago. So you can see how that invitation kind of formed us. Sports introduced me to Notre Dame. So I recall attending my first home football game in 1973. I was 12 years old. We won. It was the first game of the season against Northwestern, my other alma mater. What I remember is that I wore a dress to the game. But as a side note, I'll just share, and those of you who know my father will appreciate this. The other day, I shared that story with my dad. Right away, he told me the score of the game and that it was Ross Browner's breakout performance as a freshman. So that gives you an idea of his memory. So when I got around to high school, it was a different time. I applied to only one school. Fortunately, Notre Dame chose me. And that was something kind of imbued in our family. So I'm thrilled, too, that my siblings, I'm one of 5 children, are all here today. So I'd like to introduce them. My brother Mark, class of 79, and his wife Nan, class of 81. My brother Paul, class of 81 as well. My sister Eileen, St. Mary's class of 84, and her husband Gib Weiser, class of 84. And then my youngest brother Dave and his wife Lori, they represent the University of Dayton, Clemson University, and Indiana University collectively. So the second invitation to choose Notre Dame came from my brother Paul. So about 15 years after I graduated, I had not been involved with alumni activities at all. Paul had moved back to the area, and he called me, and he had gotten involved with the local alumni club. He said, why don't you come to a meeting? So I took his invitation, went to the meeting, and as many of you in this room can probably relate to, I was the vice president of the club after the first meeting. So I was vice president for 2 years. I then, see, they can all relate to that. I became the president. We did win Club of the Year at that time, too. And so I was hooked. The alumni clubs around the world do such amazing work, keeping people connected to each other and connected to Notre Dame, and I applaud all of you who are involved with that. And I do want to recognize one special friend who joined us today, Jana Lacera, who was president of the Notre Dame Club of Northwest Indiana for many years, retired, and because there was a need, took that up again. So she's here for leadership conference. The next invitation came after that from a lovely, lovely man named Steve Groliker, who was Notre Dame class of 42. People are nodding. He was literally a World War II hero. But he called me and said, I'd like to nominate you for the alumni board. So I was elected in 2001, finding it to be an experience that changed my life in many, many ways. When I joined the board, I had plans to leave my legacy, as many of you probably do who are on the board. So at the time, I was one of several single adults on the board. So I campaigned for a new alumni affinity group, SAND, Single Alumni of Notre Dame. We were successful, and I don't know if you know about this achievement in my background. We were successful in getting a Notre Dame version of speed dating called Domer Dating at 2 of the reunions. And we were successful in getting a travel program, one singles cruise. Unfortunately, my SAND achievements were short-lived. The concept didn't stick. But what has stuck from my alumni board experience are the tremendous friends that were formed at that. And I'm pleased that a few of them are here today. Cindy Cahill, class of 80. Jean Collier, class of 83, and her husband, Gary Anderson. Jean is a previous Armstrong Award honoree, and they drove in from Connecticut for this. And then Margot and John McQuarrie, class of 90, who became such good friends, they moved down the street from us. So there is another friend from the board, but I'll talk about him later. Okay, so part 2, I came to work here at Notre Dame in 2010, and I've had the extreme joy of filling several different roles of service here at Notre Dame. As Liz mentioned, what I call our COVID year is something that I'd like to highlight here. because for those of you who weren't here, I do want to share the stories of literal heroes. There are hundreds of them here across campus who worked on this. So our goal, right, as we know, we were only one of a small number of universities that were open in person to in-person learning, to in-person living, and in-person research. And there was a lot of work to make that happen. Thinking of the power of an invitation, there are several invitations I accepted, and it was definitely a year of choosing hard. My friend Ann Griffith commented at the end of that year that it was probably one of the most professionally fulfilling years in her career, and I have to agree with her. Here's a list of the myriad projects that I worked on during that year. So in the spring and summer of 2020, so as you know, we closed during spring break, and there was a lot of uncertainty, right? We were all uncertain. We really didn't know what this would entail. So first I led a team of that fulfilled student requests to pack their books out of their dorm rooms and ship them out. Then I worked with our mail services team to forward the mounds and mounds of mail and packages that were in the student residence halls. Then I worked with the team to procure PPE, personal protective equipment, which was in short supply, right? So trying to get face masks, hand sanitizer, all of those types of things. And aligned to that, because I have a sewing machine at home, our St. Michael's Laundry actually prepared kits for people to sew face masks because we couldn't find them initially to buy them. So there were a lot of people who actually sewed the masks that our staff wore at first. Once we knew that students were not going to return, so when we first closed, right, that we thought that they would return, once we knew they weren't going to return, we worried about what was growing in the residence hall rooms, right? They hadn't been there, so we actually had a team of volunteers that went into every residence hall to clean out any food, the refrigerators. It was a fun job, that's there. And then I helped with move out when that was scheduled, and that was so joyful because I heard from students and parents alike their joy at the message that Father John had announced a few weeks earlier, that we were going to return in person in that fall. I worked with Doug Marsh, our VP of Facilities, Operations and Design, on our facilities reopening plan. And then the school year started. And I was invited to come into the testing center operations. I have a background in process and process improvement, and to help craft our new surveillance testing program. And soon after that, I assumed responsibility as the director of the COVID response unit. So that encompassed our hotline, our testing center, our student surveillance testing team, our contact tracing unit, isolation and quarantine housing operations, and a student care and concern team. So gives you an idea of the variety that we faced. To say that I worked with teams of dedicated, selfless, agile, competent, compassionate, and intelligent individuals through all of this is a huge understatement. They are all individuals who chose hard and who chose Notre Dame over and over again. I'd like to recognize just a few who are here today. Several from the Alumni Association volunteered. Mike Sullivan, where is Mike? There's Mike over there. Was one of our early volunteers in our testing center operations, driving golf carts, I believe, Mike, throughout that. And here's my advice to you. If any of you ever need help in parenting a child, Mark Witaki is your man. So I spent hours with Mark Witaki in the fishbowl in the Joyce Center as we had our student surveillance testing team. He took calls and emails from students who were trying to get out of their requirement for their weekly surveillance testing. No one passed Mark, so. And then Ann Griffith here, who at the time was in the position that I now hold, is now our vice president for university enterprises and events. She took on the co-leadership of one of the most important functions that we had, which was our contact tracing team. And she had no background in it, right? Learned everything, but they did a phenomenal job. I'd also be very remiss if I didn't acknowledge our wonderful colleagues in athletics. Not only did we work with all of the teams on the ever-changing testing, student-athlete testing requirements, but especially our fencing team, because they were the gracious, hospitable neighbors of us in the North Dome of the Joyce Center. I'm sure you loved that we were there every day, but we are so appreciative of all those spaces that we could use. There's another amazing Notre Dame female leader here today, who I'm grateful to call my manager, Ann Firth, who is Vice President and Chief of Staff to the President, and also a previous Armstrong Award honoree. Not only was she one of the most critical leaders in all of our COVID response policies and actions, but then in the summer of 2021, after we made it through our COVID year, she phoned me with another invitation, and that was to join the team in the Office of the President. And part of that exciting invitation was the opportunity to co-lead our university efforts last year in celebrating the 50th anniversary of the admission of undergraduate women in 1972, which we ultimately branded as Golden is Thy Fame. This was a personal high for me, as it combined my desire to celebrate Notre Dame women graduates with my deep passion for throwing a really good party. And I think we did that last June. I hope, ladies, you agree with that. Yeah. So, finally, I'd like to thank and recognize two more very special people. I mentioned my father, Phil Mullaney, earlier in my opening comments. Well, he turned 90 last month. Yeah. And I'm absolutely thrilled that he could be part of this day. He's the person who invited me to love Notre Dame, and I'm thankful to him for that and for everything else every day in my life. And while I know he's here because he's proud of his children, as most parents are, when I told him that Gia, or Coach K, is the other honoree today, he was even more excited, as he told me all about your interview on the Packer and Durham show on the ACC network. And then the second person, and finally, that I'd like to acknowledge is my husband, Brian McMorrow. As I started, my failed initiative to get a SAND, Single Alumni of Notre Dame group, going, one of the objectives was to help singles, right, to sponsor programming and things like that. But the other was something that Father Hesburgh kind of inspired, which is get Notre Dame alumni, who often have shared values and experiences, to meet each other, right, as they're looking for a potential lifetime partner. Well, little did I know that 20 years after graduation, I'd meet a fellow North Quad resident who graduated just a year ahead of me. Choosing to marry Brian was definitely not in the vein of choosing hard. We were married in the Basilica, and yes, we chose Notre Dame very intentionally that day, 8 years ago, and he's been my source of love, joy, laughter, and support ever since. And I believe, Dolly, that we are the only marriage that has emanated from the alumni board to date. So that's kind of a challenge to any of you single board members out there. So with that, I just want to convey my deep thanks for inviting me here and for this lovely award. Thank you.